We are at 7:03, so just about starting time. Robert Burns, our treasurer and usual web person, our Zoom wizard who handles this, is, drumroll please, catching a swarm. Okay, Robert, go for it. So we're going to wait till about one more minute and we're going to get this question and answer started. We have some questions to start with, but not very many. So if you have a question, either throw it in the chat or just unmute and speak up and we'll try to get an answer for you. We're not claiming that it'll be the right answer, but it'll be an answer. You can bank on that. Let's see who all we have present. Ed, looks like we have Ed Darlington present, our president. Ed, how you doing? Are you feeling like talking?
You bet.
Ed's took a little spill, and instead of helping his newly repaired shoulder, he hurt it. How you feeling?
Well, I'm getting a okay day to day. I'm sure waiting for surgery this Thursday. Hopefully, get this thing repaired once and for all.
Yes, I'm sure
But
you are ready.
it's going to
That's
be a while, and so hopefully it'll follow the same as it did last time, where I had the first 5 weeks totally pain free.
well, I fingers crossed for you. I really hope so. So, do you have any words of wisdom for the group here this evening?
No, I think you've said it all. I think
We're
yeah.
going to leave that alone.
Well, no, it's one of those years where there's no pattern, and yet we have it every year. Everybody's looking for a normal, and there
Yeah.
isn't thing. There isn't. It's just and when you read things like uh, Brother Adam from Buckmaster, he talks about in 1915 they lost 40% of their hives. It was to Trachea Mites.
Yeah.
But so it's you know we've had these kind of problems with our bees, and until we figure it out, we can lose a great number of them. And now we have the compounded effect of having um, all the pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, which I think have weakened the bees' immune system. And so then we have all these others, plus the fact of the monocrops. Uh, and with monocrops, then they don't really have the food variety that they used to have. So I think we're dealing with a tougher row to hoe. I can remember back in the '60s, it was like falling off a log. I mean, you started with one or two hives, and before you knew it, you're up to 19 or 20 hives and everything you could handle. But it was all about just staying ahead of the bees. Now you got to do a lot more than that. So
There are a lot of specialists that talk about the combined effects that it don't lay the blame just on pesticides, because it is our nutrition and it is everything and the disease. So we've got a lot going on.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to start with a question here this evening this is from William Warnes, and he wrote to Bob, but Bob forwarded it to me, and he said, how is the nectar flow going given all the rain we've had? We did have a lot of rain. We had about 4.5 inches in a little less than a week. But let's kind of throw this out to whatever officers are on here, and because I think we'll find quite a bit of variety in what they have to say. How is the nectar flow going? That is the question. Jolie, I see you first. Would you like to tell us what's happening in Spring Hill, America? Jolie, I think you're muted. There, you got it. You got it. Try again.
This year, our goal is to find areas to put our bees that are a little farther from home, so that we're getting in areas where there's different rain patterns. So, I mean, because we could have 4 inches, but someone 10 miles or 15 miles from us could have 9 inches. So I think that's a big factor. So we have yards that are doing great. We think the honey flow is somewhat over because bees are robbing all over the place around our house. But there are bees on flowers, so I just think it's iffy. But
I,
iffy. But
I
I
think
will say that one of our yards, the guy called us and said, "What are the bees doing in the oak trees? There's nothing in bloom there."
Mhm.
And so maybe this is a good time to talk about what honeydew is.
Go for it. You're exactly right.
Okay. So honeydew, and you guys correct me if I don't understand it. So honeydew is something that the bees get from aphids, and the aphids eat like the oak sap or something like that. And then it doesn't agree with their digestive system, so it shoots right through the aphids, and the bees pick it up as honey. It's called honeydew, but it's sort of like, what's the word? Aphid poop? I don't know. But it actually makes a really good honey, and it really is from the sap of the trees. And it really, while it shoots through the digestive system of the aphids, it's fast enough that it's not, I don't know. You say what I missed.
It's not as disgusting as it sounds.
Yeah.
And there are
Okay. That's
people
what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
there are people who really, really like it. I think the only real caveat is that if you want to show it, that you cannot show it as honey, that your judge will almost always recognize it as something
Mm.
other than honey and treat it a little differently. It doesn't it spin like if you hold it up, doesn't it thread differently? It seems like Cecil has talked about that, that it
We're talking
actually
about honeydew.
it actually acts a little different.
Actually, if you kind of dip something in it and kind of pull it up, then it's kind of a stringy kind of, I mean, it doesn't run like just honey or liquid kind of thing. It has a stringy thing and it tends to kind of wavy a little bit as it. Yeah, that's the only way I know how to describe it, is stringy kind of.
It just doesn't look like regular honey. It just doesn't look the same. Someone last year tried to make creamed honey with it. And I know that that did not work correctly. It wouldn't set up correctly. So I don't know what that's about. I don't know what the moisture content of it is. I do know
Just
that
doesn't granulate like
yeah,
other honey.
which is might be in its favorite. There you go. So, okay, well, that was an interesting, and the other thing that they might have been collecting would have been some propolis, some resin off of the oak trees, but there wouldn't be hordes of bees doing that. They don't do that
The
in.
description was the tree was humming.
Oh boy, I would say look at the aphids in there. Well, that's so mixed and varied. On back to nectar flow, mixed and varied. Hey, Steve Musburger, I see your smiling face. You want to talk about what nectar flow is in your part of the world? Steve is in DeSoto.
Like Cecil, like Jolie said, it's a hit and miss. The bees here in my backyard are all over everything they can find. If they can find anything, what little white sweet clover I see out there doesn't look very good. I'm not seeing anything like what we saw last year. I have some yards that did well early, and then I've got some that they started to do something early and then they really haven't done anything. So I think it just depends on the area that you're in, and hopefully there's something out there. They're on our wildflowers, but that's not going to bring a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I interject? I'm the one that asked that question.
Sure,
and
Bill.
I'm a new beekeeper to the Kansas program. I came down from Omaha, where I was a member of the Omaha Bee Club. And I've been raising bees for quite a while. And I've had terrible, just terrible luck down here. I sense that there is no nectar in my area. Now, I'm just 2 miles south of DeSoto. And I want you to know that we didn't have just 3 inches of rain out here. We had 9 inches, and I think we had another little bunch. But the point is, the bees work my clover. I have about 2 acres of clover, and they work the clover, and they're working my my cucumbers. But so let me ask you this. So what would you recommend be done? Because I mean, obviously I'm not going to get much honey because my bees didn't gather much honey. Should I be supplementing? I happen to have some honey left over from last season, in foundation that I could put in there. Maybe I have to do that. I mean, does somebody have a suggestion on that?
So just to clarify, are your bees not putting honey in any surplus supers, or are their brood boxes still empty?
More the latter. I haven't even come close to being able to put a super on my hive boxes. I mean, I bought packaged bees, so you got to realize that I started off with packaged bees, and it just hasn't gone well. I mean, I went through the hives today, and I did catch one wild swarm, and that is doing terrific. I mean, she is just. I mean, I have a lot of frames of solid brood, but the ones that I bought, the packaged bees, that's so weak that, I mean, I joined one of them with that wild hive because it was going to go down for sure. It's quite a quandary. I've never had this much trouble with bees.
Well, and I think you brought up a good point is when you have comparison hives. So you can compare this wild caught swarm of unknown heritage with these package bees. And I hate to say that you got 2 packages that maybe had subpar queens in them, but although some of our hives aren't making much surplus, most of them are really healthy and lots of brood, and I'm not sure how much honey I'm going to harvest. I wonder if you don't have another issue going on there. So I see Chad Gilliland has joined us. Chad, you got any input on that? Anything you'd like to contribute?
Well, I think that you started off well talking genetics. Sometimes we can have genetically inferior bees that don't build up in the springtime the way that they should, but definitely supplemental feeding in the spring when you're trying to build wax out on frames with packaged bees is definitely a good application to do. But once you've got those frames built out, then it's time to drop off the supplemental feeding. In our areas, and sometimes it just comes down to placing your hives in the right spot. And sometimes that doesn't work if you're having your hives at your house and you don't have a great floral source around you. And sometimes you have to build that floral source. But then again, your bees don't always, look at visiting those flowers right there in your yard around the hives. They tend to forage out further, but that's the thing we look at, doing is placing our hives in areas with a known, wonderful floral source that, with the right weather conditions and the right amount of rainfall, you're going to have a good nectar flow. I did my 3rd round of honey supers today, and I would say 70% of my hives have 5 or more honey supers on them, and they're filling them strong. But then again, I've done a lot of that research on the front end to find where is the best place to place my hives that's going to give me the highest honey output, but that's what I'm in the business of, is honey output. So I may be a little bit different than some of the folks that as hobby beekeepers just have a hive or two at their house.
Sure. I mean, you really are thinking of the bottom line. My printer is doing a weird thing. I don't know what that's about. Cheryl, other end of the world over here, Topeka ways, do you have any comments that might be relevant?
I just hopped on, so I didn't hear the whole question, Becky. I heard Chad's response on some of his floral sources, and that he was still getting quite a bit of nectar in, but I didn't hear the question.
We're talking about the differences in nectar sources. Bill asked the question just basically, how are the nectar flows going? But then talked about he just really doesn't feel like his hives are producing at all. Now he had huge rain, like
Right.
9+inches, but he wants to know what everybody else is doing, but he also kind of one stronger hive, two weaker hives. Kind of, what are your thoughts on that? I'm sorry, I didn't realize you hadn't been
Well,
here.
yeah, well, a lot of it's going to depend on the strength of your hive. So obviously your stronger hives are going to be able to bring in resources that your weaker ones can't. And a lot of it depends on how much drawn comb you have. We're getting kind of past that time. You have to have pretty enormous nectar flow for them to go ahead and draw wax. Chad's probably got mostly all drawn supers. He can correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you've got drawn foundation that you can put on those hives, you're going to more likely get your stronger hives still bring quite a lot of stuff in. But to get them to draw out foundation on supers this late, I don't see enough floral sources that's going to give you that big quantity of nectar this late in the ball game, unless, I mean, they're not going to work soybeans. We have too much rain. I've only had them work soybeans 1 year, and our soybeans aren't even far enough along. At least in my area, it's going to be primarily clover that's going to put out that kind of nectar. And we're pretty much on the tail end of that, which is about normal for this time of year. When I look back at my Facebook posts, we're about right on target.
Got to get into the wildflowers, which is what Steve Messberger mentioned, is that wildflowers are really where we're at, and they're never a great flow. Hey, Jim Kelly, clear out there in Larned America. Do you have any ideas to add to this conversation?
One thing I was thinking of is exactly when did he get his packages. If he's got a swarm that did really well and the packages didn't, he may have missed. What I hear from you people over there is that you had a flow going, it stopped, and then it kind of began to start again. So his package bees may have never got a real good shot at taking off, and they're just we're really down to the end of it up there where you're at. Out here, we're just beginning. But so that may be one of the reasons why his package bees are behind. Don't know his time that he started, but that's a guess.
That's a good guess, and one that should, I mean, it's all things considered that you need to do. Bill, I also would not consider requeening or doing something else to try to change that. You still have a good amount of summer left to change that queen, to try to get them to build up, because it really is about your queen in a lot of things. So do we have any other officers on that I haven't talked to? Because I may have missed somebody. I don't know whether I've seen Joe Patrick. If you're here, she usually comes on, but
I see Robert Burns is on.
Robert has rejoined us. Robert is back from his swarm catching. Robert, you want to weigh in on this question of nectar variability?
Maybe he abandoned us again.
He might have wanted to eat food. I mean, it's like sounds like he's been going 90 miles an hour, so he may be doing something else. Well, if there's another officer on here would like to jump in, or somebody else with a comment, that would be great. But I think that's it. Honestly, Bill, that, I think, in a nutshell, shows how much variability we have, that it can be all over. And Jolie's point about choosing your bee yard, your backyard isn't always your best bee yard, and that may be that you need to think about something else. So you went on and said, has the opportunity to catch swarms passed for this season, and I caught my first one in June. That is a Robert question. When he comes back, since that's where he was catching a swarm. So there's the old adage that's a swarm in May is worth, and a swarm in June and a swarm in July, just let it fly by kind of thing. But if you're willing to, excuse me, hiccup, if you're willing to feed them, I think you can still make them work. So third question from Bill says, what's the deal with a few dozen bees using the swarm trap? I opened and no swarm or queen, but a couple dozen bees were in it. I've used a swarm trap, but I am not a particularly successful person with this. Steve Musburger, have you done swarm traps?
I have swarm traps in every one of my yards. In fact, I just pulled 5 of them down and took them out. I see people trying to hang nuke boxes up to bring them. That's not large enough. I've tried that and they don't seem to, it doesn't work. And then I hear other people, they put all these frames in there inside the boxes, and the bees don't like that either. Even though that's what we want them to do, we don't. So my swarm traps are 1.5 nuke boxes. I cut a nuke box in half, screw it to a full box. I hang them in the trees. And what I found to be successful was to put in a frame of old comb. I don't want honey in it, and I don't want a lot of pollen in it. And I put that to the edge. And then the other 4 frames I put in there have a 1-inch starter strip across the top. It seems like if you have frames in their foundations, they can't measure the box, so they don't seem to think that there's enough room for them. I'm assuming that's their issue. I've caught 2 different trees. I've caught 3 swarms out of the same tree this year. I'm sure a lot of them are mine. If mine are going to swarm, then hey, I just soon catch them and keep. And they're, we talked about honey flow and nectar flow, and so when I took them out, they're loaded with brood and honey. So they're out there finding it. Whatever's out there, they're getting. And so, and the other thing that I found out, those, what do they call those paper mache looking things? Looks like a flower pot.
Oh, kind of pressed cardboard something.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, if you use those, you're just going to be doing a cutout. That's what they get in there, and then you cut it out and you have to tie it up in the frames and stuff like that. One of the other deals is on your swarm trap, hang it level, because if it's leaning, that's the way it's going to go in there. So I've had to adjust a few of my foundations that they've drawn out, but it was take them down, take the top off, pull 5 frames out, put it in a hive body. And one thing that I've done this year is I leave my swarm right there at the tree. I put a stand down. I put my hive body down. I put them there. You'll see them bunching up there where the trap was at. They find that hive. They don't just disappear. They'll go in the hive. But my theory is they know where the nectar is. They're orientated to that. So I gain a lot. And then if I want to move them later on, end of August or something, I'll move them into one of my bee yards when I don't have to worry about it. But 3 out of the 5, I had to put a second box on. That's how thick they were. So, that's swarm traps work if you do it right.
Those are some good observations. Good,
Yep.
good.
They'll bring it
thoughts on
in.
that. So Robert, while you weren't here, we were talking about you. What do you plan to do to get your swarm to survive? Because this is a little late in the year. Bill, one of Bill's questions was, is it too late to catch a swarm? And I said, obviously not, since Robert's doing it. But what kind of special precautions would you take for catching a swarm this time of year?
Well, number one, I'm hiving them in a 5-frame nuke, but right now it's a rather large swarm, it appears. So I did what they call a 5/5. That's a double deep 5-frame nuke. And I will just monitor it. I'll check it in a week to see if she's laying and how well they're building comb. Usually swarms are great at comb building, so I anticipate that they shouldn't have any problems. And then I'm going to stick them out at the farm. We've got soybeans coming up. I don't know if they'll get anything from it, but I will probably feed them a little bit just to keep encouraging that comb building. And I would like to see all 10 frames built out in comb. And I will overwinter them that way. So I've got experience in overwintering nukes, and I like double deeps better than single. So I hope they'll make it as a double deep brood nucleus.
I think several of our members have liked that 5/5 configuration and find that because bees want to work up, that should work well. So I think it's a public service for us to go and collect swarms because they freak some people out so much. I think it's a good deed to go get them.
Fortunately, it was a holiday. The parking lot was empty. They weren't too high up. I got in the back of my pickup and was able to shake the branch and get them going. And so it's South Overland Park, just off 69 Highway. And the queen looks great. I saw her go in.
Very good.
Was it one on College Boulevard?
Yes.
Oh, good. They called us about that early, but we weren't able to go.
Good.
Well, they contacted a friend of mine in Leawood too, and a friend of hers, and so she let me know.
That's, I think, one of our biggest services is to people call, I've got a swarm, find somebody to get that swarm and get it collected. So we've talked about that. Bill, if you still have questions or concerns or you think clarifications, don't hesitate to speak up. But if not, I'll go on to another question.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for giving me their thoughts. I do believe I'm probably in a little bit of a problem. I bought those packages in May over in Lawrence, Kansas, and I will just tell you, I'm a serious gardener. I have a lot of land and garden, and my gardens have been flooded so bad that I'm almost having to start over. That's how much rain we've had out here. And I understand that when it rains, the nectar is washed out of the flowers. It's a good point. I have these on my property here. I have acreage here, and I have them on my own property. And last season, everything was so much easier. Everything was so much better for beekeeping. And, I got quite a bit of honey, in fact. But I dropped the ball on the Varroa mite, which I won't do this year. But I just going to have to live and learn here. I've been successful in the past, but I think I've got to relearn here and figure things out. And putting the bees where there is a nectar source is certainly, obviously, a good thing. And I probably have to figure something out there. But anyway, I really appreciate all the answers and thoughts. And I guess I'll just rest on the one strong swarm I caught.
Bill,
So last year was the best honey flow since 1996.
Yeah.
98.
1998, yeah.
Well,
So don't count on that every year.
okay,
Bill,
well,
you must live 2 miles south of me because in my own backyard, I have 3 hives and they're lucky if they can produce 150 pounds of honey. They just don't do well here, but I keep bees here because I like it. And then, but I'm down off 223rd and Moonlight, and they're doing great down there. So It is, you know,
Well, all I have on my property principally is my garden and brome grass for hay. So I have planted some areas on my property for bees, but it hasn't really developed very well yet. So they're basically working the clover, the white Dutch clover. And we have quite a bit of area. And I like, for instance, this morning, I mean, right at my feet, there were 5 or 6 honeybees working the clover. So they're getting something there, but these package bees, the queen, I only found 1 queen out of 3 hives, and her brood laying is so sporadic and so bad. We're not going to go anywhere. So I think what I'm going to do is join the 2 hives I have left there together. I already joined 1 hive with the swarm I caught. I'll end up with just a couple hives, but what can I do? I'm willing to learn though, so we'll see what happens.
Go ahead.
Well, one, I would say May's a little late in our area. May's kind of late to get started with packages because you need 8 weeks to build into 2 deep brood boxes. And usually by the middle of June, in a normal year, things would be cut off, but our weather was off and on this year. And so, they kind of had a slow start. It seems like we had March weather in May, and we had July weather the first part of June, first 3 weeks. And then we went into June weather, and then we had that, I think we had 12 inches of rain at the farm. So
I agree with you.
Unusual.
It's one of our beekeeping class people, I made the comment that it was an unusual year. And I think he was being a little sarcastic, and he said, yeah, but you say that every year, Becky. But it kind of is. Beekeeping is never consistent. So you just really have to kind of go with the flow. No pun intended.
We're all complaining. We complain every year.
That's it. So if I go to the chat box, Dwayne wrote a question and he said, I noticed most of my hives had a bunch of bees hanging out front, trying to stay cool and not doing much. We call that bearding. And that's happening a lot in our bigger hives. That's for sure. However, one hive has lots of bees flying back and forth and not much on the front. This is a hive that is as big or bigger than the others. Any guesses what is going on? Don't know why they don't have bees bearding, because that is pretty common. They beard so that they can get the bodies out of the hive, get air circulating, ripen that honey. But the ones that are flying back and forth, my thought would probably be some kind of orientation flights from big hatches. We've got huge hatches of brood, big sheets of brood hatching out right now. Anybody else have a thought on what might be happening there? It is always hard to tell from a description just written what actually is, but that would be my guess, Dwayne. I think that's probably it. So Michael from Barryton, Cheryl, aren't you from Barryton? I think this is a good question for you. Treating for mites with fogger and mineral oils, food grade oils, does it work? Yes or no? Pros and cons. Cheryl, you want to jump on that?
Well, I think I already answered him.
Oh, did you? I haven't seen your answer. I didn't read it.
No, not on the chat, in private. No.
Okay.
No, I don't use foggers. I use I do a sublimation with a Verox wand. I don't use foggers. And mineral oil and that sort of thing, those are not approved treatments. I wouldn't use any of that kind of stuff. Straight oxalic acid as a dribble or sublimation. So.
And our favorite Honeybee Health Coalition.
Right.
They've looked at all that stuff. They've used it in controlled settings. They've experimented. They've said, let's see if we can find the silver bullet that'll take care of this. And believe me, if they think there's a chance, they look at it. And I believe their estimation of food grade mineral oils is not effective. In other words,
Correct.
it just didn't work. So that's that. So
Well,
Barbie,
and we're still too early, really,
yeah,
for any effective control with oxalic acid. We have too much brood in the hive, and it's only effective on phoretic mites. And so that's a whole nother discussion.
it
But
is. If you have a mite load that needs treatment right now, there are other things you need to think about. And again, the Honeybee Health Coalition is got solutions or suggestions that you can try. And certainly if you're at a treatment stage, lose the hive or treat, take your pick. So that's not a good choice. Barbie Flick says the bees haven't seemed to care much for most of the stuff they regularly work around here. However, they are all over our golden rain tree and have been working it for over a week now. Who would like to talk about golden rain trees and what bees usually work?
Golden
Jolie, do you
rain
have a
trees
golden rain tree?
they can be a good nectar source. We've got a couple, three here at our farm, and they definitely hit them. But they gotta be in front of the Japanese beetles, because the Japanese beetles love to feed on the floral sets at the same time that the bees are working them. So it's kind of a who can get to it first. But I've got some of the same things that happen here on our own farm. We've got several thousand square feet of purple cone flowers. We know that honeybees will visit them, but it's interesting that about every other year they don't touch them at all, because they found somewhere within a mile and a half to even up to 2 miles, depending on how desperate they are to find a nectar source. They found something else that has a higher quality that they're willing to travel a little bit further for.
It is peculiar that some years it's this and other years it's that. Are the Japanese beetles bad in your area, Chad?
They've really just started kicking in the last week. And they've really started to hit the lindens, roses, peach trees, plums, and they'll go to apples, but they normally will hit the younger apples. And then elm trees, they'll hit the elm trees as well. So yeah, they're starting to kick in pretty good, but only in the last week or so.
So I had a person contact me because she has bees on her property, and she wanted to make sure she wasn't doing something that would harm the bees to try to deal with the Japanese beetles. They were all over her blackberries. And,
they'll hit back blackberries.
Yeah, attacking the blackberries. And so I started her with soapy water, not go just labor intensive, walk around, knock them into a bucket of soapy water. What are your go-to treatments for Japanese beetles then?
Well, I have for years done something that sometimes the folks at the K-State Extension Service will tell me I'm crazy and I don't know what I'm talking about, but I use pheromone traps. Their thought is pheromone traps will bring in beetles from neighboring properties, but when I have 125 apple trees and plum trees and peach trees and extensive pollinator gardens Japanese beetles want to go to, they're going to find the food source anyway. So if I'm drawing them in, so be it. I'll put about 4 to 5 pheromone traps at opposite ends of the property, pulling them away from the food source and trapping them, then dumping them into a bucket of soapy water, or just dumping them into a bucket of water and putting a lid on, shake it up real good, and then I'll feed them back to the chickens the next day. And we get the the brightest orange yolks because of the high protein diet. But the pheromone traps work. You just have to know that you can't put them close to the food source. You want to draw them away from the food source. You put them on a, I just drive a T-post into the ground and hang it down, try to get a wind current that will pull the pheromone, in a pattern that what's the best thing to say? Your prevailing winds. So, try to get it so that the prevailing winds are sweeping across and pulling them away from, the plants that you're trying to protect. And then, just every couple of days, empty the bags. Last year I think we harvested about 15 gallons of Japanese beetles because we'll leave them in the buckets for a couple of days until they've met their maker, and then we'll feed them back to the chickens. That way they're not flying when you open the buckets and going back to feeding. So,
you make a good point that you are already, your orchard is the lure. And so
yes,
you are bringing them in. And as I think Cheryl said, put up those lures on your neighbor's property. Well, that's a possibility as well. So after lures, what's the next preferred treatment?
that's the kickers. There's not a lot because you're looking at insecticides, and it's those same insecticides because it has to be an ingestible product.
Yeah.
It can be a contact, but if you're spraying them when they're on the tree, you're only getting the ones that are on the tree or on the shrubs at that time. So if you use a product that has a short window of toxicity on the plant, then it won't be a problem for the bees. But if you're putting anything on there that then they have to feed on the leaf to ingest, well, if that product also is put on flower sets in a close proximity, then the bees could come in contact. So you have to know what you're using, what you're spraying, what you're and what target plants are around what you're treating that might be a concern for your bees. So it's contacts or what stays on the leaf that they ingest, and you can do it right. You just have to know that your bees aren't going to be visiting those same plants.
Somebody suggested mowing. If you are bound to determine you're going to spray, that mow the orchard before, or whatever you're spraying, mow it, the area, get rid of the blooms before you do that, just so that there isn't any chance that the bees will get onto that.
That's a very smart, that's a very smart thing to take into consideration, because, one of the things that people don't consider is I'm spraying the tree, but my drift is going to the lawn or the grass underneath, which has got Dutch clover and other things that overspray will contact. Then my bees are visiting it and they're taking, particulates back to the hive. So definitely always think through a process. And if you have questions, you can always email me and I will try to get back in as timely a manner as I can on what is the best manner to treat a specific, pest. But it takes a bit of time to get the answer together, because I got to know, what's around, what you're treating, what pest are you trying to control, and things like that.
I'm going to chime in with
and he is a
Chad.
wealth of information. Appreciate that. Does someone else have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I agree with Chad. I think that the fact that they've tried to make us go away from pheromone traps is wrong. I think that pheromone traps really work. When I emptied bags and bags and bags of beetles that are now no longer there, and I didn't use, pesticides, that's a win-win. And so, yeah, I think Chad said last year that he moved them around and away from the food source. And that makes sense to me. You know, I've tried doing that, and I think you're right also in that it's in the last week they've really gotten, they've really hit us hard. Up until that, it was almost none around. So each year, not only with bees, but with other insects, it's highly variable, and you have to learn to adapt. But pheromone traps work, and they don't poison other things. So I wish we could find pheromone traps for other pests.
There are a few, but not an awful lot. That's I tend to agree with you. So Michael from Barrington has another question and says he's in rearranging frames. Should I wait until next year to do that? I made the mistake of trying a smaller frame to mine in the swarm traps. The result is the bees used it as a template and are building all off center line. I would rather be safe than sorry and wait if there is any question. Michael, I think you're on tonight, so could you clarify this just a little bit? I'm not quite sure what you're talking about.
Here. Yeah, I guess you can hear me now. My screen's lit up.
I can.
No, I just tied the comb. I tied the comb in the bait trap beside a frame that I had and hung it in there. So the comb that was hanging was off center. Well, the bees didn't read the right book. They went ahead and used that as their template and set them all up. I'm making all the first year mistakes, and I'll probably keep making them for the next 4 or 5 years. But
Or
damn it,
20.
I'm having a lot of fun.
Well, Michael, you learned a valuable lesson, and they are pretty much done drawing wax. They're not going to draw lots of wax for you yet this year. That's my thought. And so you may kind of have to live with what you got until next spring when they really will be in wax drawing mode. Robert, what do you think about that?
Yes, it's usually, middle of June was when they kind of quit unless there's a strong nectar flow on. So it's difficult. You can rearrange the frames if you want, but you've got to be careful and make sure you put good frames with good frames, and the other frames that you probably want to weed out towards the edge next year, maybe is what I would do to make it easy. And if you have like they're in a double brood box, put those bad ones on the bottom so that in February when they're up in the top one, you can easily take that bottom one and work on it and clean those out. Yeah, and from here on out, the rest of the year, unless you're in an area with a strong nectar flow, it's going to be difficult to expect any wax building.
Can I add to that?
Please do. Yeah.
Thursday, we had a youth scholarship student who was out of town, and so we were out that way. So we stopped and looked at her hive, and her box hasn't grown very fast, but her top box, we rearranged the frames. They hadn't drawn out. They'd only drawn out like 4 frames, and so we rearranged them so that we had drawn frames on the outside. And then we went back today, and they had drawn out like 4 more frames. So as long as you feed them, but that's another thing I really want to address is if you have a hive and they still have 4 or 5 frames that are not drawn out on the outside, if you don't rearrange those frames so that you've got drawn frames on the outside and you put the second hive body on, they ignore those frames, go up into the top hive body. And then if you ignore that top hive body and don't do the same thing, they could fill a super of honey and have 5 frames not drawn out in 2 hive bodies, literally have 10 frames not drawn out. So it's really a must to rearrange those frames, or you're just screwed during the winter, because you've got bees in 2 hive bodies and only 10 center frames drawn out. So I think rearranging frames is critical in our part of the country, but as long as people are still feeding, I will say that if you put a honey super on, you must quit feeding. It's actually criminal to feed
Yeah.
sugar syrup when you have a honey super on, because that's adulterating honey. And so you want to really make sure that you're only feeding when the food is going into the brood box and not into a honey super. That's
Great
my
point,
platform.
Joni. That rearranging frames is so important. Elaine Ellens asks the question that's related. She said, when, in your opinion, do you think the bees will quit drawing comb? And so you're speaking about feeding them and that you can prolong that. So this week they were still drawing comb.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Very good.
That's
Okay.
that's my soapbox today. So.
Well, I think it's a pretty valuable soapbox. That's one we need. So Alice Hamilton asks, I have one overachieving hive that seems to be building comb brood on the underside of my screen bottom board. Should I remove the bees and the comb from the bottom of the screened board? Someone told me that this may be a swarm that's settled underneath the hive. Thanks. Miss Cheryl, what do you think's going on?
I don't know. I don't use screen bottom boards. She could have a swarm under that box setting up shop, I suppose.
So Alice, is there brood in it? Or have you looked at it close enough to
know? That'd be good to know.
Yes, there was.
And you've got queen.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a little late, but what I would do, I think, or what I'll guess for Steve Tipton, what he would do, because he would probably find it. Treat that almost like a swarm.
Okay.
If you have some drawn foundation, something like that, just put them in a nuke box, shake them off, brush them off, scrape them off. They can't stay there. That's not okay. Anybody else have suggestions for how to deal with these guys? I'm not a fan of doing the rubber band, the combs into frames. We never have that work right. It's always a mess, but that's probably just us.
I do the rubber band thing just to hold them in place. Then I take string and wrap and go around it, and then I put that in. I cut the rubber bands out because they'll chew them off so fast it's not even funny. And so I figure if they snap that thing, my luck be the queen would be right there and then whack her and kill her. So so that's how I do it. And I did it today because the swarm was within the box way too long, and they drew under on the bottom of the frame. So that's what, and I later on it's not real pretty. I mean, they kind of stick it and fill it, but it does work. I save a lot of brood and a lot of nectar that way for them, and I just put them in frame after frame, and it works for me. So that's what I would do.
Oh, very good.
Cut that out and put it in a frame and string it up and set it in there.
Very good. Something happened there, something unusual. So Krista wants to know, will bees get nectar from sunflowers or from pumpkins? Hey, Jim Kelly, do your bees get on any sunflowers out there in Western Kansas?
They do, but you need to know whether they're, I guess I'm talking about planted sunflowers here, but one is confection, the other is oil. And so the confection ones, I believe, is the ones that they'll get plenty of nectar off. We do get nectar out here from wild sunflowers as well. The weather has to be right, and of course, a lot of moisture to it. But yeah, pumpkins, no, not so much. They'll get a little bit of pollen out of them, but that's about it. When we've pollinated pumpkins before, and you almost have to feed the bees because there's just not enough there for them. So pumpkins, no. Sunflowers, yes.
I had heard the same thing about pumpkins, that if you're doing a pumpkin contract, they better be paying you well because your bees are probably going backwards, that they're not going to do well on pumpkins. But I don't know. I've not done it. So good information. This is from Linda, and she says, my bottom brood box frames are not as filled out as my top brood box. Can I put frames from the top box down and vice versa? Jolie, I think this question is for you again. That's exactly what you were talking about.
So if this was April, I would say be real careful when you move stuff around. But right now it's as warm outside as the bees keep it warm inside. And so, yes, you can move frames around. You still kind of want to keep your brood together if at all possible, but you could easily move honey frames from your top box to your bottom box and vice versa. So I would definitely make sure that you have honey frames on the outside. And right now, if you have frames that are drawn out, that are nice and flat, like your honey's not bulging out, you could easily put a frame of foundation in between that, and the bees will work that real nice. So definitely you want to do that as soon as possible, that's not something you want to put off.
Linda continues with, should I continue to feed sugar water even though my hives are doing good? I quit feeding a couple weeks ago because everything was thriving.
If your foundation is not drawn out and you do not have a honey super on, then I don't know, if the bees are working stuff, maybe not, but we're just, like Bob said, we're getting to that point where they're not going to draw foundation. Especially if this is a first year hive, I'd go ahead and give them another couple gallons of feed and let them. You really want those boxes drawn out. So,
If they will take it.
if they'll
a
take
lot of
it.
times at this time of year, they just kind of go, I'm not doing that. So
We went to one of our scholarship students today, and they put a gallon on Sunday, and when we got there, they'd taken the gallon down already. So
wow,
so at least by us, they'll still use it. So
that's good. That's good. And don't let it ferment. If it gets
right,
funky,
just do a gallon at a time. So
take it off. Okay. I'm not sure who this is, but someone is asking. I have a lot of bees hanging around outside the hive. Has 2 brood boxes and 1 honey super that's about half full. Worried about a swarm. If I had more honey supers, does that help prevent the swarm? Robert, you get all the swarm questions tonight. Does that help prevent the swarm?
Well, normally you'd say, that saying, I don't know. I generally wouldn't imagine swarms this time of year. And the saying is, if you have a swarm in July, it isn't worth a fly, but we're going to try to make something of it anyway. So if you have a lot of bees hanging around outside the hive, that sounds to me like you may have bearding. And bearding is when they're relieving congestion inside, trying to set up airflow to draw the moisture down out of the nectar to turn it into honey. So that's what it sounds like to me. So chances are you wouldn't have a swarm situation. In that case, I don't worry about it. You have 2 brood boxes and 1 honey super that's about half full. So it's not completely full. So it sounds to me like bearding. Worried about a swarm. Generally, swarm season is April, May. This year it's May, June, and obviously July 5th. So I wouldn't add another honey super if it's only half full. You didn't say if it was drawn or if it's foundation, but if it's only drawn, half full, meaning half occupied with bees, I'd wait until you get a couple more frames, 7 or 8 frames. But keep an eye on it because it could change in the matter of a few days depending on where you are and what's out there.
That's for sure. Good advice. Good advice. So another person says, one hive has 2 brood boxes, and the top box only has honey, and my queen gone, question mark. So is the queen gone? How difficult is it to reintroduce a new queen? So is there no brood in either box? I think this person is here. I don't know what name, just a phone number, but you could sure tell us what's going on in that hive if you want to. Maybe not. Okay. Barbie says, thanks for talking about Japanese beetles. Barbie, I will tell you that it is very satisfying to go by plants and to drop those little boogers into soapy water and watch them try to swim. It's not very, it's almost as much fun as squishing a small hive beetle, but that's just probably too much information. So,
Becky, sometimes on those dial-ins, when they dial it in instead of Zoom coming in through their computer, they don't have the option to be able to answer. So
you want to give that question a guess?
I would say you need to look down in that bottom brood box. It's good if you have your top brood box full of honey, because that's how it should be if you only have 2 boxes.
Yeah.
But check for brood. It's natural for things to slow down. You should see some eggs and larvae. If you don't, then you can confirm that maybe you don't have a queen. But look and see how old your brood is. And, you know, it's easy to introduce a new queen, but you may not need one.
Boy, moving that box is hard. It's heavy. You might want to get a bee buddy to help you lift it off. It's a strain, but you don't know what you don't know. If you don't look in the bottom, you just don't know. So be sure that you check it all out. And if you want to email one of us, don't hesitate. We'll talk about what's going on in there. So we are past 8 o'clock. I want to remind everybody to join us on the 3rd Monday for our regular monthly meeting. And strangely, it's going back to a Zoom meeting, and it is a strange reason. Christy Sanderson, did you ever join us? I don't see Christy. Do you, Robert?
I don't see her.
I bet she was involved. So Christy's our program chair, and for this month's meeting, we have the fabulous Dr. Judy Wu from up at the University of Nebraska. We are so happy to have her. We are going to do it Zoom for 2 reasons. One, I don't think the University of Nebraska is letting their people travel out of state yet. And so to get Judy, she needed to do a Zoom presentation. Well, we were hoping to do it at the fairgrounds. Douglas County nixed that. They're using the fairgrounds for jury duty selection so that they can spread their jury people out and make selections. So it is not available to us. So we will meet with the miracle of Zoom one more time. And I hope you'll all join us for Judy. Does anyone else have announcements for the group before we close for the night? Well,
I think there was one from Linda Orick.
I must have missed it. Go ahead.
She said, should I continue to feed sugar water even though my hives are doing good? Oops. Sorry, I'll get that. I quit feeding a couple of weeks ago because everything was thriving.
Yeah, we did talk about it briefly, but we can talk about it some more. We said pretty much, Jolie mentioned that she had a scholarship kid that was still, their hives still took sugar syrup, and other people, you know, we said, well, if they will take it and you don't have a honey super on. If you have a honey super on, do not do that. So
great. Thank you for repeating that.
Oh, that's okay. That's all good. So Nick says, great questions. Thanks for joining us, Nick. That was, it's always fun.
And
so
Becky, thank you for covering for me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for asking. It's always fun. So I hope we'll see you all next Monday. Judy Wu talking about mites, public enemy #1 for the bees. Nothing's more important for this time of year.
The Johnson County Fair is the end of this month, and anyone who wants to enter their honey can do so if you'll go to johnsoncountyfair.com or .org and look it up. You can do that. So it's July 26th. You can bring your honey entry in from 6:30 to 9. And July 27th, my 70th birthday, you can bring it in from 8 to 10 a.m.
Happy birthday. So Jolie, what's our value added program from KHPA this month?
Oh, it's Chad. Hey, you guys. It's Chad talking about infused honey and Withrow, what's his first name?
Brian.
Brian
Withrow.
Withrow talking about making creamed honey. So the two of them are doing that on the third Thursday of the month.
Awesome. Those are fabulous gifts for looking ahead for the holidays. Just couldn't be better. Oh, that'll be a great program. Okay. Well, I hope we all see you Monday, the third Monday, and then I hope we see you all the third Thursday. So come and join us. It is a free program sponsored by Kansas Honey Producers. Everyone have a good night. Stay cool. That heat can be deadly. Be careful.